Seeking a formal interpretation from the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA, is a process that involves submitting a detailed request regarding a specific code section of the National Electrical Code, or NEC. This process can be initiated online through the NFPA website. The key to a successful request lies in providing a comprehensive description of the issue that requires clarification. This description should clearly outline the specific code section in question and the context in which the interpretation is needed. The NFPA's review process involves its technical committee, which is responsible for the relevant code section. This committee assesses the request and formulates an interpretation based on consensus. The NFPA aims to provide a written interpretation within approximately 30 days of the request submission. Formal interpretations issued by the NFPA are considered authoritative sources for understanding the NEC. These interpretations can be valuable in resolving code disputes or ensuring compliance with the code's requirements. They represent the NFPA's official stance on the meaning and application of specific code provisions. To delve deeper into the request process, firstly, identify the specific section of the NEC that requires interpretation. This involves pinpointing the exact wording or provision that is unclear or subject to multiple interpretations. Secondly, formulate a clear and concise question regarding the identified code section. The question should directly address the ambiguity or uncertainty that needs to be resolved. Thirdly, provide a detailed explanation of the context in which the code section is being applied. This explanation should include relevant information about the specific installation, equipment, or situation to which the code section pertains. Fourthly, gather any supporting documentation or evidence that may be relevant to the interpretation request. This could include drawings, specifications, manufacturer's instructions, or photographs. Fifthly, visit the NFPA website and locate the section for submitting formal interpretation requests. This section typically provides instructions on how to prepare and submit the request. Sixthly, carefully complete the online form or submit the required documents electronically. Ensure that all information is accurate and complete. Seventhly, upon submission, the NFPA will acknowledge receipt of the request and assign it to the appropriate technical committee for review. Eighthly, the technical committee will review the request and may seek additional information or clarification from the requester. Ninthly, the technical committee will develop a proposed interpretation based on the information provided and their expertise. Tenthly, the proposed interpretation will be subject to a public comment period, during which interested parties can provide feedback. 11thly, the technical committee will consider the public comments and make any necessary revisions to the proposed interpretation. 12thly, the final interpretation will be issued by the NFPA and made available to the public. These interpretations serve as an official clarification of the code's intent and application. They provide guidance to electrical professionals, inspectors, and others involved in the design, installation, and maintenance of electrical systems. Furthermore, these interpretations can be used to resolve disputes or address inconsistencies in code enforcement. It is important to note that interpretations are not legally binding regulations. However, they carry significant weight and are often relied upon by authorities having jurisdiction or odds in making decisions about code compliance. Therefore, understanding the process of requesting and obtaining formal interpretations from the NFPA is essential for anyone working with the NEC. Formal interpretations from the NFPA are invaluable resources for navigating the complexities of the NEC and ensuring electrical safety. By following the outlined steps and providing thorough and accurate information, individuals can effectively leverage the expertise of the NFPA technical committees to gain clarity on specific code requirements. Consider a scenario where there is uncertainty regarding the interpretation of the term accessible as it applies to electrical equipment. An electrician may encounter a situation where equipment is located behind a locked door, and there is ambiguity about whether this meets the code's accessibility requirements. In this case, the electrician could submit a request to the NFPA seeking a formal interpretation of the term accessible in this context. The request would include a detailed description of the situation, including the location of the equipment, the type of enclosure, and the reasons for the locked door. The NFPA Technical Committee would review the request and consider factors such as the purpose of the equipment, the frequency of access required, and the potential hazards associated with unauthorized access. The committee would then issue an interpretation clarifying whether the locked door affects the accessibility of the equipment and what measures, if any, need to be taken to ensure compliance with the code. This interpretation would provide valuable guidance to the electrician and the authority having jurisdiction in resolving the issue and ensuring the safety of the electrical installation. Another example could involve a question about the required working clearance around electrical equipment. The NEC specifies minimum working clearances for different voltage levels and equipment configurations. However, there may be situations where the physical constraints of a building make it difficult to achieve the required clearances. In such cases, an electrical engineer could submit a request to the NFPA seeking an interpretation of the code's working clearance requirements. The request would include detailed drawings and measurements of the space, as well as information about the voltage level and equipment configuration. The NFPA Technical Committee would review the request and consider factors such as the available space, the type of equipment, and the potential hazards associated with reduced clearances. The committee might issue an interpretation allowing for a reduced clearance under certain conditions, provided that adequate safety measures are implemented. This interpretation would provide a basis for the engineer to design a safe and code-compliant electrical installation within the limitations of the building's physical constraints. Furthermore, imagine a situation where there's confusion about the application of ground fault circuit interrupter, or GFCI, protection requirement. The NEC mandates GFCI protection for certain types of receptacles and equipment located in specific areas, such as bathrooms, kitchens, and outdoor locations. However, there may be ambiguity about whether a particular receptacle or piece of equipment falls under these requirements. In this instance, an electrical contractor could submit a request to the NFPA seeking an interpretation of the code's GFCI protection requirements. The request would include details about the location of the receptacle or equipment, its intended use, and the potential hazards associated with its operation. The NFPA Technical Committee would review the request and consider factors such as the proximity to water, the likelihood of contact with grounded surfaces, and the potential for electric shock. The committee would then issue an interpretation clarifying whether GFCI protection is required in this specific situation. This interpretation would help the contractor ensure that the electrical installation complies with the code and provides adequate protection against electrical hazards. Formal interpretations from the NFPA play a vital role in promoting electrical safety and ensuring consistent application of the NEC. By providing a mechanism for clarifying ambiguous code provisions, the NFPA helps to reduce confusion, resolve disputes, and ultimately improve the safety of electrical systems. The process of requesting and obtaining these interpretations is an important tool for electrical professionals, inspectors, and others involved in the electrical industry. It allows them to leverage the expertise of the NFPA technical committees and gain a deeper understanding of the code's requirements. When submitting a request for an interpretation, clarity and specificity are crucial. Vague or ambiguous questions can lead to equally vague or unhelpful responses. Instead, frame your question in a way that directly addresses the specific point of contention or uncertainty. Provide as much relevant context as possible to help the technical committee understand the situation. This includes information about the type of equipment, the location of the installation, and any relevant environmental factors. Supporting documentation, such as drawings, specifications, and photographs, can also be helpful in illustrating the issue. Before submitting a request, it's advisable to review existing interpretations and other relevant resources. The NFPA website contains a wealth of information about the NEC, including previously issued interpretations, technical articles, and training materials. Reviewing these resources may answer your question without the need for a formal interpretation request. Additionally, consider consulting with other electrical professionals or code experts to get their perspective on the issue. Collaborating with others can help you clarify your understanding of the code and formulate a well-reasoned interpretation request. Understanding the limitations of formal interpretations is also important. Interpretations are not legally binding regulations. They represent the NFPA's opinion on the meaning of the code, but they are not a substitute for the code itself. Authorities having jurisdiction, or OJs, have the final say in interpreting and enforcing the code. However, AHA typically gives significant weight to NFPA interpretations when making decisions about code compliance. In cases where there is a disagreement between an interpretation and the AHA interpretation, it's essential to engage in open communication and work towards a mutually acceptable solution. A goal is to ensure that the electrical installation complies with the code and provides an acceptable level of safety. Moreover, remember that the NEC is a dynamic document that is updated every 3 years. As the code evolves, new interpretations may be issued to address emerging technologies and changing industry practices. Staying up to date on the latest code changes and interpretations is crucial for electrical professionals who want to ensure that their work complies with the most current requirements. This involves actively participating in continuing education, attending industry conferences, and subscribing to relevant publications and online resources. By staying informed and engaged, electrical professionals can effectively navigate the complexities of the NEC and provide safe and reliable electrical services. In the realm of electrical installations, understanding the nuances of conductor bending space within enclosures is paramount for ensuring both safety and compliance with the National Electrical Code, or NEC. Conductor bending space refers to the area within an electrical enclosure, such as a POW board or junction box, that is specifically allocated for the bending and routing of electrical conductors. This space is essential for facilitating proper connections to terminals, circuit breakers, and other components within the enclosure. Inadequate bending space can lead to a multitude of problems, including difficulty in making connections, stress on conductors and terminations, and increased risk of electrical faults. The NEC provides detailed requirements for conductor bending space in Article 312 and other relevant sections. These requirements are based on factors such as the size and number of conductors, the voltage level of the system, and the type of enclosure. The code specifies minimum dimensions for bending space based on the wire size and the bending radius required for the conductor. These dimensions are intended to ensure that conductors can be bent and routed without exceeding their minimum bending radius, which can damage the insulation and reduce the conductor's current carrying capacity. When determining conductor bending space, it's crucial to consider the size and type of conductors being used. Larger conductors, such as those used for feeders and service entrances, typically require more bending space than smaller conductors used for branch circuits. Additionally, the type of insulation on the conductor can affect the bending space requirements. Some types of insulation are more flexible than others, allowing for tighter bends. The NEC also addresses the issue of conductor fill within enclosures. Conductor fill refers to the percentage of the enclosure's cross-sectional area that is occupied by conductors. The code limits the amount of conductor fill to prevent overcrowding and ensure adequate ventilation. Overcrowding can lead to overheating of conductors and terminations, increasing the risk of electrical fires. To determine conductor fill, it's necessary to calculate the cross-sectional area of all conductors within the enclosure and compare it to the enclosure's total cross-sectional area. The NEC provides tables and formulas for calculating conductor fill based on the size and type of conductors. In addition to conductor bending space and conductor fill, the NEC also addresses the issue of working space around electrical equipment. Working space refers to the clear area in front of electrical equipment that is necessary for safe operation and maintenance. The code specifies minimum dimensions for working space based on the voltage level of the equipment and the type of work being performed. Adequate working space is essential for allowing electricians to safely access and work on electrical equipment without being exposed to hazards such as electric shock or arc flash. The NEC also requires that working space be kept clear of obstructions such as storage boxes or equipment. Obstructions can impede access to the equipment and increase the risk of accidents. When designing and installing electrical systems, it's crucial to carefully consider the requirements for conductor bending space, conductor fill, and working space. Failure to comply with these requirements can lead to code violations, safety hazards, and operational problems. Consulting with a qualified electrical engineer or inspector can help ensure that the electrical system meets all applicable requirements. In addition to the NEC requirements, manufacturers of electrical enclosures typically provide their own recommendations for conductor bending space and conductor fill. These recommendations are based on the specific design and construction of the enclosure and should be followed whenever possible. Manufacturers' recommendations can often exceed the minimum requirements of the NEC, providing an extra margin of safety and reliability. Staying up to date on the latest code changes and industry best practices is essential for electrical professionals who want to ensure that their work complies with all applicable requirements. This involves actively participating in continuing education, attending industry conferences, and subscribing to relevant publications and online resources. By staying informed and engaged, electrical professionals can effectively navigate the complexities of electrical installations and provide safe and reliable electrical services. The appropriate conductor bending space depends on several factors. Firstly, the size of the conductor is a primary consideration. Larger conductors necessitate greater bending space due to their increased rigidity and the need to avoid sharp bends that could damage the insulation or compromise the conductor's current carrying capacity. Secondly, the number of conductors within the enclosure impacts the required bending space. When multiple conductors are present, sufficient space must be provided to accommodate each conductor's bending radius without causing overcrowding or interference. Thirdly, the location of the terminals or connection points within the enclosure influences the bending space requirements. Terminals that are positioned close together or at awkward angles may necessitate additional bending space to facilitate proper connections. Fourthly, the type of enclosure, whether it's a panel board, junction box, or other type of enclosure, affects the available bending space. Different types of enclosures have varying internal dimensions and configurations, which can impact the ease with which conductors can be bent and routed. Fifthly, the NEC specifies minimum bending space requirements based on conductor size, voltage, and enclosure type. These requirements are intended to ensure that conductors can be bent and routed safely and effectively without exceeding their minimum bending radius or causing undue stress on terminations.